All right, everybody. This is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, it's the free stuff again. This free stuff concept, it ain't going away anytime soon. And it's not going away not just because Republicans are bad, and they are, and not just because people aren't smart, they aren't, but because progressives themselves, who are fighting for these things that are deemed free stuff, are more politely free shit, and they don't really know how to defend it. You've heard the same defense for as long as I've been alive, anyway, where it's like, well, this is about greed. It's about, you know, understanding that the least of us need to be able to do better in life. And you've heard all the same repeated stories, right? And it hasn't really made a dent. None of these people that were for helping people suddenly had an idea. By Jove, they've got it. They're right. We should give up our stuff to give to the poor. That's exactly what we should do. It just hasn't happened that way. And it probably never will. The reason for that is yes, in a strange random act of defiance, humanity has decided that it would rather eat its own and be greedy than actually live in a cooperative sharing society. The Christian community pats itself on the back when they donate a couple dollars here and there and so forth. But in reality, the vast majority of people are not able to get what they need, number one. And number two, they probably have to do some sort of tap dance of purity to show that they're worthy of assistance or worthy of your considerations. And this is a real problem. This is why charity sucks in America. It's why charity sucks in general, because we shouldn't be forced to do a tap dance to try and make you feel like we deserve to eat, or we deserve to have our liver fixed or our heart repaired or a broken bone fixed, or our teeth fixed or whatever. We shouldn't have to beg and do some Al Jolson routine to try and get you to be entertained so that we are deserving now suddenly by working our way, by performing for you. And we're suddenly deserving of basic human dignity. But this free stuff thing is very deep and pervasive. It goes back as long as time has been around. And to be fair, it's in the Bible. People talk about, feed a man, for a day, whatever, teach a man how to fish, and damn it, he is eaten forever, right? That whole line of reasoning. So naturally, they're fighting this battle based on worthiness of support, worthiness of whether you deserve food, whether you deserve medical care, and whether your lifestyle represents somebody worthy as opposed to worth less, worthy of consideration. Now, it wouldn't be so bad if this was the way it was and everybody was all on board with trying to use some peer pressure to make people make better choices, whatever, right? If the playing field were level. But the playing field is absolutely not level. And, a podcast we did not too terribly long ago, Ivan Ivernizzi of Retta MMT in Italy had a great write up and a great discussion on currency and how currency gets spent into existence and arbitrage and how there's preference in who gets that first dollar and there's power and prestige. And I likened it to like a cocaine dealer, how the first person that gets the sale gets the pure coke. But then after that, the lesser and lesser dealers start stepping on it, making it less pure. And all of a sudden you end up sniffing borax instead of, cocaine, whatever. But that's the nature of preference, and that's the nature of imbalance and inequity in our society as a whole. As the world turns, it's the same thing all over. I mean, there's places where there's little glips of equality, but for the most part, extremely unequal life, unequal world that we live in. So when we talk about free stuff, we're not really talking about, hey, I'd like to get a 52-inch TV or a 60-inch TV, and, I want it to be the 4G variety because I really want to have the best clean picture. Oh, and by the way, can you do it for free? That's not what we're talking about, right? Obviously, it's not what we're talking about. When you see people living in cardboard boxes under bridges, and your first thought is they should have made better choices, you're probably an asshole. Just to be square, just to, put that one to bed. You're probably an asshole. And when you look at the average person struggling, you'd have to come up with similar results. You're an asshole for blaming them as well. But maybe it's not so clear when you look at your neighbor. And you know your neighbor, you saw him sitting on the back porch drinking a beer, you saw him smoking a joint, you saw him, going to the movies, maybe even saw him buy video games or something like that. And you feel like, there's a guy that squandered his riches and therefore deserves to starve, deserves to lose his home, and deserves everything bad that comes because he wasn't good with his money. Because after all, if you're not good with money, you deserve to die. Because that's what happens in America. If you aren't a real good mensch when it comes to how you handle your coinage, you deserve to die. That's the going rate. That's the mantra. So, needless to say, I started digging around because, coming back from the Ayn Rand school of thought where everybody is a maker or a taker, and, the high, lofty ideals of the maker and the slovenly, neediness of the taker. What a society, right? To see everybody in terms of maker or taker. But what if society maybe were geared differently than that? What if you weren't taking from the people? What if there was another way to make some groups whole while not impacting those necessarily who, were doing all right? Maybe making all ships rise, including those who were doing right. Maybe just treating humanity, regardless of station, as deserving of health care, deserving of education, and deserving of, a right to a life of dignity. I don't know about you, but I've been around a lot of people that had a few bucks one day and were completely bankrupt the next. Happens all the time in the shitty society we live in, this great dog-eat-dog world that we're so proud to be a part of. So why in the world would we act like people as a whole should not be entitled as a part of society? Forget the poor. This way we take the stigma off the poor. Forget the poor for a minute. Just make it a basic human right. Everybody gets health care. Everybody has a right to a job. You see, everybody has an entitlement, if you will, as a right to get an education. I think that these are some basic things, right? Some basic things. People should be able to live lives with dignity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next thing. This right here is an article. Before I set it up, I want to tell you about this article. A few years back, Paul Ryan had this great story he told about this kid that all he wanted was a brown paper bag lunch. He didn't want the school lunch. He didn't want to have to get the token that said you're poor and you need the school lunch program. He wanted a bag lunch because when you have a bag lunch, that means someone loves you. Okay? This is the guilt trip they play on people to try and paint these images so that people that do need assistance feel like absolute and utter garbage. Your family doesn't love you. You're worthless. You're scummy. All that horrible, evil, right-wing, Sig Heil shit. All that gaslighting built in to hate the poor. Well, here we go. This next article that I'm going to read is by J.D. Alt. J.D. Alt has often written here at RP, and he's also written at New Economic Perspectives and other places, written a bunch of great books. But he wrote this great piece called The Oppressive Free Lunch. And I'm going to read this to you because I think it's a really important article. Now, mind you, this is going back to 2014. Just to put it in perspective, this is not a new problem. And sadly, when you see where he comes up with, you're going to get the feeling that you've been there before. Mind you, 2014, we've been struggling with this for years. Let's go at the top. Trying your best to balance the federal budget with a limited number of tax dollars, and doing so while visibly displaying great compassion for your fellow citizens in the hope they might reelect you requires some very special thinking skills. These unique skills of rational analysis and gentle compassion were on display recently when Congressman Paul Ryan gave a speech to the Conservative Political Action Conference, laying the groundwork for his forthcoming efforts to cut the deficit by reforming the welfare system. Now, folks, this is very real stuff. Even this is 2014. You see the same stuff happening today. So in his speech, Mr. Ryan told the story of the sting oppression suffered by a young boy who was given a free lunch every day at school, presumably as part of the National School Lunch Program initiated by President Harry Truman in 1946. As Mr. Ryan related it, the young boy told a political activist that he didn't want a free lunch. God, he's aware, right? What an aware little child. He didn't want a free lunch. What he wanted was his own lunch in a brown paper bag like the other kids who brought their lunch to school. He wanted it in a brown paper bag, he said, because he knew that a kid with a brown paper bag had someone at home who cared for him. Isn't that something? The levels these parasites stoop to is just beyond words. But anyway, here we go. This triumphant revelation of how federal poverty program actually oppresses the poor, makes them feel less than human, traps them in unending dependency for free lunches, met with instant outrage from progressives. Not, however, for the reasons you might think. The progressives, after all, are dealing with exactly the same shortage of tax dollars as Congressman Ryan. So there are limits to the dimensions their outrage can take. In this case, Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post, fact-checker, awarded Mr. Ryan 4 Pinocchios, the maximum penalty for having told a story which, as aggressive journalistic research revealed, was untrue. It never happened. It never actually happened as Mr. Ryan related, hence the progressive outrage. Folks, trust me when I say this. This is like asking for Donald Trump's tax returns. Big deal. We know Ryan's a liar. He lied. Yes. It gets interesting. So what is interesting here is how neither side in this debate seems capable of dealing with reality. The fact that there is clearly an underlying truth to Mr. Ryan's story, even if it's merely a parable, is something neither he nor the outraged progressives are able to acknowledge. Mr. Ryan implies that the boy's mother is feckless, lazy, good for nothing, who doesn't even care enough about her child to pack him a paper bag lunch and send him off to school to beg for food so that she, no doubt, can be free to engage in illicit activities. He also implies and further suggests, with other analysis, that the boy's mother exhibits this sociopathic behavior because she is the victim of another federal welfare programs which help pay her rent, pay her to be unemployed, reduce her monthly grocery costs. The reasons all this must be true is because if it isn't true, we have a big problem. If the boy's mother really doesn't have the means to pack him a lunch every day because, in spite of her genuine and monumental efforts to find good work and gain a financial footing, the private sector economy simply has no paying position to offer her. If that were the case, it would be logical to believe that she actually deserves the very best assistance we as a collective society can provide. Believing that, however, would require diverting tax dollars from some other spending program which is equally essential, or raising more tax dollars, which is politically impossible. So you can see how tricky and important it is that A, the mother actually doesn't deserve the assistance, nor B, does her child even want it. Are you tracking here? Should sound familiar because this is what every progressive and every Republican and every Democrat say, because they're economically illiterate. So we keep on going. In many ways, the thinking is even trickier for the progressive. They begin with the premise that the boy's mother is doing the best she can with the opportunities provided to her, and that she really does deserve the very best assistance we can provide. They further believe that neglecting to provide that best assistance is not only an ethical failing, but extracts real costs from our collective well-being by laying the ground for millions of lives to fall dramatically short of what they otherwise could achieve. With these premises like a banner leading their parade, the progressives lift their knees high, marching vigorously in place. They could step forward and boldly claim new territory. They could, for example, assert that true welfare reform must start with universal prenatal care, expand to universal housing and grocery vouchers for homeless mothers, universal pre-K and daycare programs for every urban neighborhood and rural community. To conservative objections that instigating programs like that would simply make the mothers perpetually dependent upon the state, the progressives could respond to that. It's not about the mothers, it's about the generations to come. True, they could say a lot of those assisted mothers might fall into a habit of dependency, but their children will do better in school, grow up to be more productive and socially acclimated adults, and be less likely to need welfare themselves. Effective welfare reform, in other words, designs its own future obsolescence. Now, mind you, this is 2014. These things, while they're certainly noble, they are not even good enough, in my opinion. We should have universal services. But we'll go further. So this is the kicker. This is the final paragraph. And this is the freaking smackdown, if you will. He says, but the progressives, of course, can't march forward. They just pump their knees and stay in place because they can't think of how to answer the one simple question, how are you going to pay for it? If one or two progressive leaders would just make the effort to inform themselves about how a sovereign, modern fiat currency actually functions, they'd realize paying for it is actually the easiest part. The hardest part for the enlightened progressive politician is going to be staring down the incredulous giggles of the status quo pundits. The status quo pundits, folks. You know, every fool out there, including our alternative media, that ignore MMT, that scoot around it and ignore it. They act like it's silly, that it's a psyop or something stupid like that, right? The Green Party ignores it. These establishment hacks ignore it. The Republicans ignore it. Everyone ignores it. But there's a new group of people coming to be, right? Well, unfortunately, we've got stuff going on here, folks. We got real stuff going on, and it starts with this Bernie Sanders meme I'm going to describe here. This Bernie Sanders meme makes all the sense in the world to the average progressive. They're not going to flinch, and guys, I love Bernie, so don't let a fool step and say something like, Grumbine diss Bernie. Little did you know you get a smack for that. That's not what I'm doing. I'm being an effective citizen. I'm being the only alternative media you have that tells you the truth about economics, unfortunately. Yet you tend to gravitate toward the ones that lie to you. That's okay. We'll fix that. But in this meme right here, Bernie says, let us wage a moral and political war against war itself so that we can cut the military spending and use that money for human needs. Okay, Bernie. Now here's the problem with that, right? The problem with that meme is that while it sounds good, and in many ways it's got the right sensibilities, because obviously we want to get rid of the military spending, at least the way it is. We obviously want to spend on the people and spend on human needs and so forth. But why is it a problem? Well, I already told you a lot of it. That last article by J.D. Ott told you why this is already screwed up. And we can go back to that real quick for a second, just to kind of get to the top so we can see specifically what I'm talking about. They always talk about, here we go, here it is. Not, however, for the reasons you might think. The progressives, after all, are dealing with the same shortage of tax dollars as Congressman Ryan, so there are limits to the dimensions of the outrage it can take. And up here, they talk about trying your best to balance the federal budget with a limited number of tax dollars and doing so while visibly displaying great compassion. Okay? And so this is all buried under this idea that it's your tax dollar, for whatever reason, the fetish that keeps us there. The belief, this ridiculously racist belief that somehow or another taxpayers are funding everything, right? When, in fairness, what about the poor folk? What about the folks that don't have a good job, don't even have a home, etc.? It's just ridiculous. And this is where the Ayn Rand makers and takers kicks in. And every time you say taxpayer dollars, this is the shit you're getting. Because, and I answer it, here's my response to Bernie. In that meme, I took the time to read that thing. And I said, there is no money laying around by cutting spending. Spending is always a decision, but it doesn't have any impact on affordability. The U.S., as with the U.K., Australia, Japan, China, and Canada, for one of our Canadian friends who say I don't mention Canada enough, creates currency every time it spends and deletes currency every single time it taxes. At some point, the issue comes down to, do we have the real resources or not? Do we have the ability to do whatever it is we're attempting to prioritize? Cutting the military budget is great for moral reasons, but affordability must absolutely never be the fake excuse for doing it. That false paradigm keeps us from a Green New Deal, keeps us from Medicare for all, it keeps us from free college for all, and it keeps us from ever shedding the burden of student debt. You have the best economist on your team. Listen to her. Stephanie Kelton is amazing. She knows. This line of cutting spending here to find money for other things is neoliberal austerity, and it is antithetical to your purported intentions. I beseech you, learn MMT. So, I say this, and I know that there are people's heads that are going to explode when I say it, right? So I'm thinking I've just said this great comment, and I'm like, yay team, right? Doing my activism all's well. And here comes Jackhole. This guy is a special neo-maxi Zune dweeby. And what he does is John Grande comes in and says, there will never be money for the Green New Deal or free shit for everyone. Two completely unrealistic and stupid ideas from Crazy Bernie and that moron AOC. Yeehaw! Right? And he says, and I told him something back. I mean, it was like ridiculous. My normal elbow of truth moment. And I called him a worm with the double dots on the top, right? So Smarty Pants here thinks, that's worm. We use English here. We use English here. I can't help that you're a childlike a character that believes in fairness and free shit. But you gotta work here in America for your dream. No one owes you a handout no matter how much you whine. Woo! This, my friends, is the average American voter, including Democrats. They don't know any better. They really do believe it's tax dollars paying for shit. So this is the kind of moronic stuff that we face as we try to do great things once again. Now, I have told you, and I have demonstrated, that taxes at the federal level do not fund spending. And that free stuff is a matter of perspective. Because right now, our federal government does free stuff, spending into the military. Now, it's spending on people, it's spending on jobs, it's spending on munitions and tanks and planes and all kinds of stuff, right? But why is it that when we talk about spending on the people, it's free shit? Now, this guy went on to say a bunch of other things, and I had some things to say back to him. Because you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm about tapped out when it comes to alternative social media, not paying attention to economics, and people still following them as they burn us to the ground. I'm about tapped out of politicians not telling the truth, including the ones we love. I'm about tapped out of the people that do understand this stuff being gatekeepers and treating activists like second-class citizens and tone policing them. I about had it with people acting like this is a secondary issue to election reform, when in fact you can have all the fair elections you want, but if dumb people are voting and they don't have the information, you get these John Grande guys still, and you know what? You're in a worse place than you ever were. It all matters, right? You got to fix elections, but you got to fix the idiocy when it comes to economic illiteracy. And so as we're pushing through this stuff, I realize this article from J.D. Alt was from 2014. A lot of the articles I share from 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, during the global financial crisis. And none of the shit's changed. But we're talking about health care as a right. We're talking about having a real honest-to-God free college where people can go to better themselves and be a help to society in terms of knowledge that maybe they solve some disease. Maybe they go ahead and find some great technological advance. Who knows? Maybe they just take care of their children. But ultimately, we can afford to do all the things that are before us. The only thing stopping that is that person staring back in the mirror. As long as we don't understand that our nation creates money every time Congress spends, and that it deletes money, it's the way that it keeps the money from not growing out of proportion. It deletes money every time it's received as a tax. It's not printed. They don't print money like that. They only print enough money for bank teller transactions and for whatever the public need for having cash on hand is. The rest of it is digital money. And it's money added by crediting and debiting accounts. And that's how it's done at the Fed, too. They debit and credit the Treasury's accounts. It's not like they print money. It's not like the printed dollar is the dollar. It's debit up, debit down, credit down, whatever. And that is how it's done. So when they say they can't afford these things, or there ain't no free stuff, the issue comes down to is, where do you want that money spent first? Do you want it going straight to a defense contractor, who then pays employees and so forth, granted? Or do you want it to go straight to the people that need it most and let them make choices with where they spend their money, so that people actually have to address their needs to earn that money? Now, it doesn't really have to be either or at this point. We obviously need a military of some variety. We don't need the Golgothan one we have today. We don't need to be the world's police. We don't need to be imperialists. So what is it that we need to do then? In other words, what is it that we need to do to overcome these people running around saying you just want free stuff? We've got to learn that economics doesn't work that way. The money has got to get into the economy regardless. This is why the economy either succeeds or fails. This is why we have recessions when we cut spending. This is why we have boom economies when we increase spending. Sometimes we have boom economies for short times and create these bubbles. It's private debt induced. And you saw that with the housing crisis, where people were buying 4 and 5 houses with only a $35,000 a year income. You saw this with a bunch. That's predatory capitalism. That's neoliberalism. And MMT is the antidote for all that because it teaches us that we don't have to rely on Wall Street or private banks and blah, blah, blah. That we, the people, have public money. Forget Margaret Thatcher and Ronnie Reagan. We have public money. And that public money is created every time Congress spends with these absolute constitutional approval in Article 1, Section 8. They have the power, and they use it all the time. They just use it on the military. They use it on tax breaks. They use it on a bunch of things. And so when you run into these folks that don't want to learn MMT or call it a PSYOP or whatever, they're feeding into this right-wing nutter. They're feeding into this MAGA dude, and they'll call themselves progressives. I want you to know Nancy Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi, who wanted to do PAYGO, who thought taxes funded spending and wanted to make sure everything was revenue neutral. These are the people that force us to fill the economy up with private debt. Joe Biden, same exact way. All of these fools that are establishment hacks are the same exact way. Now, I want to bring you back to Bernie's meme real quick. There's something very important there. The highlighted area. The moral case. They're highlighting that. I'm going to tell you why that matters. When we use code, because for whatever reason, politicians are scared to death to be the jokester, the harlequin that goes out there and tells the story of how sovereign money works. And so by being petrified of doing such things, they end up having to try and do a Texas two-step to kind of say the way everybody's used to hearing it while simultaneously trying to break new ground. That's what Bernie's trap is right now. Bernie's stuck in a holding pattern to some degree while his economist and his team is pushing for a Green New Deal and many, many other things. He's also left trying to deal with an unbelieving public. And like you saw, many people really do believe it's just free stuff. And they believe worse off that it's their hard-earned tax dollar it's paying for it, which isn't true at all. It's not true. And at some other point in time, we'll go through why it's not true. Because it's a long discussion that deserves a much longer talk than I have time for at the moment. But this is the only way you're getting a Green New Deal. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was handed the book, Macroeconomics Textbook by Bill Mitchell, Martin Watts, and Randall Wray, handed to her no less than by Andres Bernal, former RPer. And there you go. There's your harlequin, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's come out in support of MMT. She's taking bold steps in support of MMT. That's why she, with conviction, is able to fight for a Green New Deal, where many of her own supporters are inept and ill-equipped to take that leap with her. That's why she's advancing a federal job guarantee. That's why she's advancing so many other bold progressive. And she hadn't even been around, 10 minutes? She hadn't even been a 6-month serving. Well, I guess maybe she's coming up on her 6th month. But she's rocked the house in less than half a year. Hell, in her first 3 months there, she had already flipped the tables in the temple. She had already disrupted the money changers. She had already started telling you how it is. Do you think the AOC fans out there are going to learn MMT so that they can support their favorite candidate? Do you think Bernie supporters are going to raise their hand and learn MMT so they can support their favorite candidate? Their favorite politician, their hero? How many of you think that Bernie supporters will go out immediately and learn MMT so they can be useful to the movement? I hope a lot. But it's been years, and I've been waiting for that to happen. And little by little, I'm watching as the tide turns, and I'm watching a big shift happen. But it's not happening fast enough. Remember, every day that we don't get this right, every single day we don't get this right, people are dying. People are going without health care. The planet is burning up because we don't have a Green New Deal and we're not getting rid of fossil fuels. Every day you fail to learn economics so you can put pressure on your Congress critters and teach your friends and neighbors so that they put pressure on their congressmen. Once you learn that the lights have to go on because the lie that you've been told for so long has kept you in the dark, once that light goes on, you are forced, you've got to go out and fix it. You are responsible to fix that. And that, my friends, is the answer to the oppressive free lunch. That is the answer to every one of these right-wing smear campaigns about what do you want, free stuff. If you don't want to lose everything, you will take the time to learn economics. If you don't mind us all dying and losing health care and not being able to fix the planet in time, you go right ahead and keep calling it a psyop and ignore it. Do me the favor. Do a solid for us all. Learn MMT. There's very little excuse for not getting that the nation itself creates its own currency every time it spends. And don't let the Fed people get you all goo-goo-eyed. They'll spin you in a circle in a Gordian knot and keep you all fuzzy and crazy. Oh, I gotta chase the Roth, the Roth. I mean, these Rothschild hunters, just imagine if they really wanted to be effective. Why not bribe the God-blessed butler of the Rothschild family and say, dude, here, I'll slip you a solid, 8-ball, or here's some money. You go put some, soap in the bottom of the shower stall and let him slip and, slip in the shower or spike his Earl Grey or whatever. But no, they don't do that because it's just a freaking distraction. It's bullshit. Congress created the Fed in 1913, and Congress alone has the ability to regulate banks. We already have public banking. Why aren't they acting like it? Because Congress has purposely deregulated them. Banks are licensed agents of the U.S. dollar. Congress alone has given them that power. Congress alone could take away that power. But don't think for a minute that creating something called public banks is any different than what we have today, because what we have today is only the bastard child that it is because we've allowed Congress to deregulate them. So if Congress was the one that deregulated banks, how do you think Congress is going to go through suddenly creating public banks? I'm just spitballing with you here, because the money for public banks has to come from the sovereign currency issuer, which is the federal government. I don't care if you have local and public banks. I mean, that's great. I'm a big supporter of all sorts of stuff like that. But it is not a panacea and is not an answer to the major problems that our Congress has to address alone. Our federal government is the sovereign currency issuer. That's where the fix is. Anything else is a Band-Aid. Maybe a nice Band-Aid to have, but it's still just a Band-Aid. Your job, my job, is to change the minds of a disbelieving and unbelieving public and get them to understand the simple truth that money is merely a tax credit. The federal government needs to be able to provision itself. It issues currency that you would not need for anything unless it issued a tax on it. Once it places a tax on that currency, now you need the currency, so you'll go do something to get the currency. What do? Well, back in the day, the government used to use it for its own purposes. It would say, hey, we need you to make a railroad. Hey, we need you to make an aqueduct. Hey, we need you to build the White House. Hey, we need you to do whatever. And they would issue money and they would give it to them, but they would tax that money to force them to give that back, so they would need that currency. See? So taxes aren't used for funding things. They're used to drive the need for currency. So think about this. Free stuff? Hardly. You want to fix that problem? It's in your hands. There's no excuse at this point. The knowledge is there, the information is there. Take the time to learn it so that we can win. And so we can not deal with guys like this anymore. Or at least when we do deal with them, we have a ready answer for them as well. So with that, I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Have a great night, everyone.